Hey, welcome to Dirt Road Diaries. My name is Dana. Today we're going to be discussing one of the first characters that, well, she's just kind of a cool broad. Her name is Pamelia Mann. And stick with us and see if you find her as interesting as I do. Pamelia Mann starts out, there's not a whole lot known about her. Her maiden name was Dickinson. We do know that. We do know that she's not a guy that you would trust around your husband. She had a habit of collecting them. But we do know that she was born around 1800. Legend has it, and it's her legend, by the way, stories that she told, that at the age of 16, she runs away. She doesn't get along with her mom at all. And so at the age of 16, she runs away, and some people say she went to New York. Some people say she went to New Orleans. Her own accounts are that while she was in New York, she worked at a brothel. She never, ever claimed to be anything other than who she was. She was a prostitute. And she worked at a brothel there in New York until some other girl and her got sideways, and she supposedly pushed this girl down the stairs and broke her legs. Yeah, you wouldn't want to cross her either. And her own accounts are also that she's in New Orleans and that she actually shot a guy who abused one of the girls that worked for her. By this time, she supposedly owned a brothel in New Orleans. Now, how much of this is true, we don't know, because if you're not aware, in Texas, we never let the truth get in the way of a good story. What we do know is that she originally is attached to a guy by the name of Hunt. We know that at the age of 19, she had a son by him, and she named that son Flournoy. Must not have liked him much. Really must not have liked him because she nicknamed him Nimrod. We also know that a few years later, about 5 years later, in Kentucky, we don't know where Nimrod was born, but we do know that in 1826, she has another son by a different husband, a guy that she's now calling, her husband is Samuel Allen, and she has a second son, and she calls him Samuel Allen, and he was born in Kentucky. We have his birth records. So where New York and New Orleans all fit into that, I don't know. So again, how much of her life she embellished, we don't know. But we do know that she's with a third husband by the time she comes to Texas. Now, this guy's name is Marshall Mann. Nothing is really known about him, and to be honest, the only part of her story that he's in is the fact that he gets her to Texas. So Marshall Mann is in 1834. Marshall Mann and Pamelia Mann arrived in San Felipe in 1834. We got records of that. We also have records that she opens up a boarding house in Washington in 1834, and that is in operation at the time that Washington becomes the center of all Texas politics in 1836. So she opens up this boarding house. Basically, you get room, board, and if you want it, female companionship. So it's a brothel. By any other name, it's still a brothel. Nimrod and her are in business together. Now, is this time that another story, now there is actual fact to back this one up, is that she encourages Nimrod to shoot a guy. Nimrod had put up a fence around the boarding house, and a man comes through with some cattle, and he's on his way. I'm not sure why, but he threatened to cut the fence, and she steps out on the porch, and she basically screams out, "Nimrod, just shoot him. Just shoot him, Nimrod." Luckily for Nimrod, he didn't. I'm not sure how that would have ended up, but yeah. So, now in 1834, if you were in Texas, you had to agree to a few things. First, you became a Mexican citizen. You had to swear to Catholicism, convert, swear your allegiance to Mexico, and you had to abide by the Mexican Constitution. Texas wasn't very good at that. So by 1836, Texas has decided that they're going to declare their own independence. And they decided on a place called Washington on the Brazos to hold the convention that would write the Declaration of Independence of Texas and the Constitution. Sam Houston is one of the biggest players in Texas history, and he and Pamelia Mann are close friends. Pamelia Mann's boarding house was a little over a block away from the Independence Hall there in Washington. We do know that Sam Houston stayed with her quite often. Probably encouraged some of that female companionship. And they were friends. They weren't acquaintances. They were friends. They were so friendly to the point that not only did Sam stay with her, that at the time of the runaway scrape, when Texas was literally being beaten up by Santa Anna, and everyone was making a run for the border to get back into the United States, get over to Louisiana, that Sam asked a favor, a really big favor. So Pamelia Mann had these oxen, and she had packed up her entire boarding house, and she was with everyone else. She was just trying to get ahead of Santa Anna's army, to save everything that she's worked so hard for. And so she had her carts loading down. She knows she might have had more than one team, but we do know that Sam Houston sweet talked her and convinced her to loan him a couple of oxen. Why did Sam need these oxen? Why was it so important? Well, the Texas Army had been gifted, after the fall of the Alamo, the Texas Army had been gifted 2 cannons, the twin sisters. But Sam had no way of getting these cannons around, so the oxen were vital to the Texas Army. Pamelia offered to loan them to him on one condition. That is, that he kept them out of battle. So the agreement was that Sam and the Texas Army could go into battle, but the oxen had to go on. And Sam agreed to it. But then again, Sam was known to tell big lies too. So Sam and the Texas Army take off. They're on their way. The story is told that upon arrival at Grosse's Plantation, G-R-O-C-E-S, Grosse's Plantation, Pamelia Mann had gotten word that Sam had turned and was headed towards Harrisburg, where the battle was going to take place, where Santa Anna's army was. And she was hot. She was majorly mad. And Will Hogan, who knew her very well, first of all, no one ever described her as being pretty. No one ever described her as being, you know, charismatic or anything. She is described in this, I quote, alert in her thinking, versatile in profanity, proficient in firearms and the Bowie knife. And Sam at this point was in her crosshairs. She rode her horse all the way, caught up with the army, literally rode right up to the front where Sam was, and starts cutting her oxen loose. She is cussing Sam up one side, down the other, calling him a dirty lying scoundrel dog, every dirty thing you could think of. And all the Texas Army are sitting back in awe of this crazy lady. This woman is literally cussing out Sam Houston. One of the captains that was with Sam turns and looks at Sam and says, Sam, what are you doing? You can't let her take those oxen. And Sam looks at him, and just as serious as he can say, he says, man, she bites. She bites. Well, this guy, apparently, he wasn't a very smart guy, because he ends up taking off after her and the oxen, trying to get the oxen back. Now, you have to understand, the oxen were vital to the Texas Army. They had to get those cannons. Well, the guy shows up 3 days later, bloodied, bruised, cut up. His shirt literally is shredded. No oxen. Pamelia kept her oxen. Was that the end of her friendship with Sam Houston? No. Sam Houston, of course, does defeat Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, and Texas receives its independence, and we become the Republic of Texas. Government is set up. Original government set up, and well, they fought over it quite a bit, but it started out in Harrisburg, and then Harrisburg burned. Well, Pamelia had started up. Apparently, she had a tent boarding house set up in Harrisburg, and Harrisburg burnt, and she settles again in Houston. Well, there in Houston, she's borrowed $1,000 to build a true hotel. Now, she's not above using slaves. She used slave labor. She had slaves. Her and Nimrod both had slaves. And then she also used Mexican capture or captured Mexican labor. So basically she used forced labor to build this manor that she called Mansion House. And this was a boarding house, again, a brothel. It is at the corner of Mileb and Congress in Houston, and there's still a building there today, and it's still called the Mansion House. I doubt it's the original, because I doubt she would have been able to afford to build with brick. Nothing in Houston was brick at that time. But she started her business in about 1837, when Houston was, the town of Houston was the center of Texas politics, and Sam Houston was their leader. Sam Houston and her continue to be best friends, so much so that when Nimrod eventually gets married, she's on husband number 4 at this point. Yeah, she's on husband number 4. Nimrod finally decides to get married, and who does he choose to be his best man? Sam Houston. Sam Houston stood up and was his best man. Now, during this time, she got into a lot of legal issues. I would imagine running a brothel. I don't know. But she got into a lot of issues. They say there was no one else who had as many legal actions taken against her or started legal action against other people at any time in Texas history than it was those few years that she was in Houston. We do know that the biggest trouble that she got into was actually that loan. She took a loan for that $1,000 to create her mansion house, and the guy died. So as far as she was concerned, the debt died with the guy. But the wife, the estate, had other issues. So a legal action was brought against her, and in court she produces a document, basically says that she paid that debt. And guess who it was signed by? Sam Houston. But she was actually arrested and convicted of forgery. And forgery is a hanging offense. So why didn't they hang her? Well, her other political friends. Now you have to understand that Manor House, they say that you could walk out of Congress and look and see Manor House. So she had lots of political clout. For a woman who basically was ill repute, she had a social status in Houston. And Maribou Lamar, who was the president of Texas at that time, actually granted her clemency. And she continued to prosper until 1840. Upon catching typhoid, she died at the age of 40. Why is she so impressive to me? This woman started out with nothing. She raised her children. She was a survivor. She took that $1,000 investment, and when she died, she left Nimrod an estate of $40,000. Today's money, that's like $1 million. And she was versatile in profanity. I love that. If you would like to find out more about Pamelia Mann, please check online. If you happen to know where she's buried, I would love to know that. I would really like to know where she's buried in Houston, because she has to be buried there. But yeah, if you know anything about her, or if you like this story, please click thumbs up. If you'd like to subscribe and hear a few more of our stories, maybe the Sam Houston, who was the real Sam Houston. Hey, who was the real William Barrett Travis? Was he a hero or a zero? Click subscribe and we'll follow these videos up. My name is Jana. I'm with Dirt Road Diaries, and I appreciate you sticking us out today. Thanks, and have a wonderful evening.